Hello everyone. Now that it's been a few weeks since LYCH was released, had a couple weeks to play around with how the boss works, how to counter it, and now I think it's a good time to make a tier list of it with every tower path in the game, similar to what I did with the Bloonarius tier list. If you missed that one, I'll leave a link to it in the description, but basically the rules are the exact same. To reiterate, each of the tier 5 tower icons here represents the entire path, starting from tier 3. So like, for example, Ultra Juggernaut will take into account the Spikeable, the Juggernaut, and the Ultra Jug into its ranking. Also, this ranking will not take into account ranked mode, because that's technically separate from LYCH itself. So that means Permaspike will not be S tier in this ranking, despite what you may think, based on what you saw in my LYCH runs, where I used Permaspike a lot, but that's only because I was going for a very low time. So I want to make that very clear, and I think that's all the disclaimers we need to start, so let's begin. Now, this tier list doesn't include Paragons, so I'm going to start with all those first. Just shove them all into the S+ tier. Doesn't really need an explanation, but basically, they are the best choice by far for the last years. Just because you can't really super buff any tower to get even close to on par with Paragons that, you know, do a lot of power without requiring any buffs whatsoever. Enough said, practically essential if you're trying to beat Elite LYCH. And now let's go over Dart Monkeys. So, Ultra Juggernaut is going to be in the F tier. That's the same tier I put it in for Bloonarius, but that was a mistake because I didn't take into account maps that had a lot of walls, in which case it'd be better than F. But hell, even if it's a map with a lot of walls, Ultra Jug is not your first choice, because, well, it's good against group Bloons, and LYCH does not spawn group Bloons. It spawns high HP Moab class Bloons, which U-Jug doesn't really do amazing against, like, no matter what the situation. Now for Plasma Monkey Fan Club, this one has to go in F tier because LYCH steals the Plasma Monkey Fan Club buff. In case you don't know, there's a nice little post on Reddit that shows what you can and cannot use in terms of buffs against LYCH. But basically the theme is that if the buff is not an aura buff, so like it's a duration buff, then LYCH can steal that. Now for Crossbow Master, I'm very tempted to put this one in D tier, but I think I'll just opt for very low C. Oh right, I should mention, I will try to rank towers in between the tiers as well, so there is a difference between putting a tower first in A versus last in A. But yeah, Crossbow Master's damage against Moabs, it's pretty subpar. That's really all I gotta say. It's not the worst option, but there's never really a situation where you absolutely need to get this guy. So moving on, again, there are like 60 plus upgrades, so I will most likely try to provide as brief and informative of an explanation as I can for each of these. So Inferno Ring, I think I'm going to put this one in the D tier. Reasoning, well, it's supposed to be good against group Bloons, and there aren't any group Bloons spawns in LYCH. And on top of that, the Inferno Ring ball shoots too slow to be actually worth it, like, against LYCH DPS. Super Maelstrom, again, another upgrade that's supposed to be good against a crap ton of Bloons, and it lacks that in LYCH. So because of that, C. It's not useless though, because it actually does quite a good amount of damage against Moabs. If you get damage stacking towers like, you know, Super Brittle or Crew Moab, damage could add up, but again, it's far from the best option. And for the attack zone, this should be pretty self-explanatory. It shoots so many projectiles, which means amazing against small class Bloons, thus LYCH. I think it deserves an A+. I did say in the Bloonarius video that the S tier is reserved for, like, absolutely essential. And attack zone is one of those things where technically you can win without it, but it's so good that you might as well incorporate it because it's, well, the meta strat. Let's go over to the Boomerang, Glaive Lord, another upgrade path that specializes in group damage, but because, I'm gonna say for the 1000th time, LYCH doesn't have group Bloons, it pretty much has to go in C tier. The only reason why it gets more than F is because the Glaive duty does do some mold damage, just not super amazing. Boomerang Middle Path Perma Charge, LYCH will steal this buff because it's a duration buff, not an aura, so F tier. Mob Domination, so the mob damage itself isn't that great, but I reckon that the Mob Press has some sort of use against the Chain Moabs, helps give you a little bit of time in order to beat them. However, there are better options like a Mob Shove, so because of that I can't really rank it very high. I think it'll deserve a C. So yeah, so far very low rankings through the first 3 towers, but hold on, things may change. Bomb Shooter Balloon Crush. This is a pretty similar explanation to the Mob Dom. Basically, its only use is for stunning the Chain Moabs so they don't get by, or even the Chain TDTs. In Elite LYCH, that's kind of a problem, because the Chain Moabs have so much HP. And in that case, Bloon Crush may not be a terrible option to keep them in place. Otherwise, it's pretty much worthless. Now for the Mobile Limb, which its middle path was obviously designed for multi-class balloons, and thus deserves an A class. In fact, it gets a better boost versus other towers because, well, middle path bomb ability never required like buffs like Overclock and Homeland in order to increase its DPS. Because a lot of the damage comes from the ability, which does 4500, which makes it really good for Tier 1 Lich, Tier 2 Lich. Later on, the scaling kind of falls off, but nonetheless, it's still a pretty solid option, I would say. Now for Bomb Blitz, this will be an interesting one. I'm going to throw it into B tier. Here's the reason why. So in case you don't know, the Lich Soul that steals lives, that can trigger Bomb Blitz, which makes it sound pretty good, right? Well, yes, it does make it pretty decent because it can, you know, kill the chain mobs as well. However, optimally speaking, if you had the right setup, you wouldn't even get to the point where you would lose lives from Lich Soul, because your DPS would be enough to break it before you lose lives. Alright, Balloon Solver. This thing sucks against Moabs. No question about it. Straight down to the F tier you go. If anybody thinks it deserves a tier other than F, then I need a little bit of what you're smoking. Next up is Gluestorm. This one's going in the A tier, because it's one of the few things that can make you do extra damage to Lich without it stealing the buffs away. Again, I don't put it in Essential because it is only a +1 damage, so any difference it makes is generally minuscule, but definitely something I'd still recommend to get. Super Glue, this one fills the same niche as Bloon Crush and Mob Dom in Lich, which again is just Chain Moab Stun, so thus very low C tier. I guess Mob Glue could be a decent option too. And now for the last of the primaries, Ice Tower. Super Brittle deserves an S tier, like no question about it. Huge damage boost, useful for all parts of the game. Case closed. Absolute zero. So the ability for this you never want to use because it increases the attack speed of Ice Monkeys, and that is a duration buff, so Lich would steal it. However, it's still kind of useful because, well, ice platforms. Basically, you want to use this guy to either put farms on water to get more farms up, put the temple on water so that you can give it an attack speed boost with Carrier Flagship, on top of the temple glitch as well, although I don't want to count glitches into this ranking because that could be patched at any time. Overall, this is a pretty hard upgrade to grade, so I'm just going to put it in C- for now. Icicle Impale, same thing as Super Glue, except it doesn't have a tier 3 upgrade that could be useful early game, aka Moab Glue, so it should be a little lower than Super Glue in that case. And that does it for the primary towers so far. So now we move on to snipers. This one is very self-explanatory. It is the same thing as Super Brittle. So again, end of story. Now for middle path sniper. This one's going to be a little lower than my Bloonarius ranking. I'm going to put it, let's say B+. Reasoning, sniper farming isn't quite as good as other forms of farming like actual farms and merchantmen. Especially with the change in 28.0 where they cap the amount of abilities after a certain amount of time has elapsed in a round. But nonetheless, I can never give a super low ranking to things that give money, and fairly efficiently once you get it up. Elite Defender, you might think this one's actually really good, but here's the problem. Lich can actually steal the Elite Defender buff if you lose lives, so that makes it not so great. However, it could still be good for tier 1 to 4 where Lich doesn't take away buffs with infinite range, so you put it in the right spot, you know, you'll be safe. But personally, it's not really worth going for unless you're absolutely sure you will not lose lives to the Lich Soul. Now for Energizer, this one takes a hit in Lich because, well, Homeland and Overclock are pretty useless. So instead, it's going to be high A tier. Let's say over here. The only abilities I guess this would help with is, you know, if you're going sniper farming, or for Gluestorm or the Mad, but none of those are, you know, essential options. Preemptive Strike. I think this one fills a similar role to Mobile Limb, except it's a little bit worse. Reason being, they changed it so that the first strike can't go through more than one skull at once. Because like before, you could two-shot Bloonarius with 2 first strikes, but now it's limited to the amount of skulls there are left, so you need 6 first strikes to kill like a normal Lich, for example, at full HP. Nevertheless, still an okay option because its damage was never affected by stuff like Homeland and Overclock. Now for Sub-Commander, I think I'm going to give this guy an A-. Sub-Commander army can definitely rack up a crap ton of damage when you pair it with Brittle and Krupa Moab. Not as good as like Attack Zone, but certainly holds its own, especially because it's infinite range when you go advanced intel. So unlike Tax Zone, you don't have to Chinook it for it to constantly keep doing damage. Now for a Carrier Flagship, these ones again are hard to grade because its usefulness very much depends on the little buff it gives to, well, True Sun Gods. And I guess because True Sun Gods aren't S+++ tier, spoiler alert, I think I'm gonna have to give this one a B+. When you do go for Temples on Water, however, this thing is definitely a must. Pirate Lord, this thing would be F, however, you are able to hook in the Chain Moabs, which does help out a little bit. Like, say for example, your defense is out of range of the Chain Moabs, and so it'll take a little bit for you to kill those Chain Moabs, and thus making Lich invulnerable for longer. But if you instead insta-kill it with a boat, it's pretty much indirectly helping you kill Lich faster. So that explains the low C ranking. Trade Empire Merchantman, very good. Doesn't really need an explanation. S tier farming option, right below farms. Top path ace, Sky Shredder. I'd say this thing is pretty useful. Not as good as like a Sticky Bomb, but I have tried fighter planes in the past in other bosses, and it does okay. And I reckon top path, you know, all the way to Sky Shredder would be decent as well. Not a top tier option, but can certainly pack a decent punch. Next up, Star Bomba. This thing would be F, but the only reason I'm giving it one tier above is because of that ability that can stun. Pretty useless, but I guess if you're really in a panic, then I guess this ability could help you a little bit. Big Plane. I'm gonna put this one in around B tier or so. Nothing about it really screams big amount of damage, but if you have that point in the game where, again, you need to spam towers and you have all the money in the world, this thing is just a very quick thing to plop down and do a decent amount of damage. Not as good because it can't be buffed, of course, but relative to the other towers we have in the field here, it's okay. Now for Apache Prime, this thing's mob damage was never super amazing. That's why I'm gonna put it in high C, similar to where I put it in Bloonarius. Now for the Marine, this thing pretty much gets boosted all the way up to A tier because of that Chinook ability. Because if you don't know, if you sell towers in Lich, it'll heal Lich, so don't do that. Instead, the way you want to relocate towers is using the ability. I use it all the time, trying to move my brittle in different spots over the map. It's pretty much the only way to get things to work without healing. Next up is the Comanche Commander, but that also includes the Mob Shove. And in fact, Mob Shove is pretty good for the early tiers of Lich because, well, it excels in knocking back 1 or 2 Mob class Bloons, and you're only going to be reviving 1, 2, or 3 of them at a time. So that makes it a pretty good pairing with, like, Sticky Bomb or something like that. And honestly, Comanches aren't terrible too, because you couldn't outbuff or overclock them, the mini Comanches. So now, relative to other towers, it should perform a little bit better. Biggest one, Mortar. F tier for sure. This thing is meant for, you know, group Bloons, and again, there ain't none of that in Lich, aside from the normal round spawns. Middle Path Mortar, so they added the ability that makes the Mortar shoot faster. That heals Lich, so don't get Artillery Battery. But I think you don't get the attack speed bonus anymore when you get popped on, so technically, it could be useful just for stunning Bloons, so it would deserve, in that case, a similar tier to Sarbama at D. Bloon Incineration, pretty much a meh mob damage option, so because of that, I'm going to be putting it in about C tier here. Now for the Dartling Gunner, Ray of Doom. This one really only gets points similar to Bloonarius because of Plasma Accelerator, which is an okay option for the first tiers. Otherwise, there's no use because Ray of Doom's mob damage is pretty pitiful. So B- it is. Next up is the Mad. This one I put as essential for Bloonarius, but I'm gonna put it in the A+ tier next to Attack Zone. Because, well, a lot of the power is in super buffing and Mad, but now they can't do that. Definitely loses a lot of its essentialness. However, there are a few maneuvers you can use for the first few tiers because the Mad is infinite range in that, like, you can overclock it, outbuff it, as long as you put it far away enough from Lich. Then you get the benefit of buffing the Mad without having any consequence. Just, again, watch out for tier 5. Bez Dartling Gunner. This thing did get buffed this update to shoot a little bit faster, and because its blind path has a lot of projectiles, that means it should do decent damage against Lich. So I put it similarly to where I put Plasma Accelerator, low B. And so that does it for military towers. So far looking like they're a little bit more useful than primary monkeys. Next tower on the list is Archmage, who does pretty decent mob damage, but again, it's not really amazing. So it would be a C+ for me. Wizard Phoenix is a little bit more grouped damage oriented, but still does decent mob damage. I don't think it's as good as Archmage though, especially for its price. So because of that, I'm gonna put it somewhere in middle C. Next up, Prince of Darkness deserves, I think, D tier. It's just not good mob damage. See my Bloonarius tier list explanation for this tower for the rest, if you still have doubts as to why this isn't a good tower, at least in bosses. Now for the ninjas, Grandmaster Shinobi, I think I'm gonna put in B tier. I think it's basically a worse sub-commander, because it takes a while to get a Shinobi army set up. By that point, its DPS probably has fallen off a little bit. That and it doesn't have, you know, a huge amount of range. Similarly, I gotta put the Grand Sabo right next to it, because, well, Shinobis are tier 3 middle path. And lastly, for the ninja, Sticky Bomb, I'm gonna put it in high-ish A tier. Again, it's one of those really good options for tier 1, especially when, well, the chain spawns. There's only a few of them, so one sticky can pretty much handle it. Or if it's not enough, just pair it with a couple more stickies or a mob shove to help make a devastating combo. Now time for a tower that LYCH will steal the buff of, but I'm not going to rate F tier because there is actually some use to it. The top path Alk. Gonna put it over in mid C, low C or so. Reason being, as I said earlier for the Mad, you can still find a loophole around the first 4 tiers of LYCH by using Alchemists, because LYCH's soul stealing isn't full map range. So you can get away with like an Alch buff Mad, an Alch buff Plasma Accelerator, Alch buff Plane, Alch buff Sub. Not to mention, Alch buff is a good and cheap way to pair with another tower for defending the no round spawn so that you can farm harder. Next up is Total Transformation, which LYCH will steal the buff from, so don't use it. F tier you go. Now for Rubber to Gold farming, or BMA. I think I'm going to put it similarly to where the Sniper is, in low A. Rubber to Gold is a nice and cheap farming option. On top of that, BMA could help a little bit with one-shotting the chain mob so that you can, well, kill LYCH faster. Now let's move on over to the Super Monkey, a true Sun God. This one I think I'm still going to put in S tier because, well, after you get Paragons, what are you going to get? The best thing is pretty much, well, a Temple. Gonna put it in low S though. On top of that, I should mention when you pair it with Adora, you can basically get up to 2 times the amount of damage without LYCH stealing the buff away, because LYCH can't steal hero buffs. Now, for the other 2 paths of the Super Monkey, I think it's going to deserve very similar scores to what I put for Bloonarius. This, I would put in high C. Does pretty good mob damage, but Sun Avatar outclasses it. Same goes with Legend of the Knights, Dark Knight Crosspath. Couple bonus points because you can dark shift it to put it in anywhere in the map. Now over onto Druid. I was going to put this in F tier, but I'm going to put it in the very lowest of D tier. Just because Superstorm can again blow back Moabs, which I guess could be 1% useful. Spirit of the Forest, middle path Druids. I think it's still a pretty okay farming option. No longer as good as boats or farms, but the Jungle's Bounty buff makes it a really good early game option. A 0-3-0 Druid and a hero can basically beat the first 40 rounds by itself, meaning you just farm in the meantime. So pretty much this only gets rankings because of everything but the tier 5 upgrade. Avatar Wrath is also very, very, very good. Don't think it's as good as Attack Zone, but it's a decent option nonetheless. And that does it for Magic Towers. So what do I think about Top Path Village? I guess pretty good. Again, you can decrease the cooldown of Glue Storm, which helps tremendously. You can also use pre-training to buff Tax. Really good combo. Oh yeah, I also forgot to decrease the cooldown of the mobile ability. Now for the Homeland Village. Again, this is one that LYCH can steal buffs from, but it's not going to be F tier because you can find a loophole in using Call to Arms for the first 4 tiers. And again, as long as the buff towers are out of range of LYCH, you'll be fine. I think it's a little bit less versatile than the Alchemist though, especially with it being so expensive. Monkey Opolis, this thing needs no explanation. S+ tier. Must get. Next up, Superminds deserves, I think, a pretty low ranking. Because, well, there's no use in getting it. Other than because you have enough money that this thing would actually be pretty okay DPS. Carpet Spikes is an upgrade I put probably in about low A tier. I put this pretty low in Bloonarius because, well, NK changed it recently where using buffs on the Carpet Spikes doesn't actually make it shoot more spikes out. However, because those you can't use against LYCH, Carpet Spikes will move up relative to the rest. Next up is Perma Spike. In case you didn't hear what I said earlier, this is not a ranked LYCH tier list. This is just a normal, unranked LYCH tier list. Because of that, I think it's going to go along with Super Mines. If you're not throwing it at the entrance and using buffs 3 rounds before the next tier spawns, then don't bother getting it at all, because otherwise it just won't do a whole lot against it. Alright, farms are a very easy one to grade. I'm just gonna do S, S, S. It's hard to say which one's better than the other, because, again, circumstances, it really depends on the map. Like, if you want to be traditional, go top path farm. If you're an expert and you want to milk every penny, then try IMF loan and banks. Or if you have water, then Central Market plus boat can be a pretty good combo. Not to mention farms give lives, which could give you cushion. And now the final stretch. Start with the Century Paragon. It's a shame you can't Homeland buff, because if you could, this guy would be absolutely nutty. But instead, he's, I guess, decent. Overclock Engineer. I'm gonna throw this one over the C mines because it's a little more versatile than the Call to Arms buff. Like, a go-to staple of mine is overclocking a MAD out of range to give it, you know, a solid amount of attack speed, solid DPS boost, while not helping LYCH at all. And for a bottom path NG, again, this thing would be F tier, except for the fact that Trap actually profits a little bit. So in that case, I'm gonna put it in B-. However, Trap farming kind of falls off, unless you're going for, like, a sick Rubber to Gold plus Trap combo. But with that said, that is all. The final tier list for LYCH, ladies and gents. Again, I am excluding heroes because this video is already too damn long. But y'all already know Ben is the way to go. Or if he's banned, then go for Adora or Sod for early game. That's really all I gotta say. Let me know what you think of this tier list. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Though I bet with over 60 upgrades ranks, I bet there'll at least be one disagreement. But of course, that's all okay. Everyone can have their opinion. Especially if we're all civil in discussing it. And again, if you missed my Bloonarius tier list, check that one out as well. Hell, maybe even compare the two tier lists to see how they differ. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.